A local Grove City native, Dale, was convicted of murder in 1982. Dale was accused for killing his beloved daughter and her boyfriend. The bodies were found dismantled, scattered through the river. The community was shocked as their views on Dale began to skew. Dale began to serve his time, even moving on to death row for 7 years. He pleaded for the appeal, knowing he was falsely accused. Finally, after about 12 years in prison, new evidence surfaced. Police began to piece together evidence they initially pushed away. Their vision was locked on Dale, but evidence pointed towards Chester McKnight. He was a heavy drug addict, and witnesses say he followed the couple to the cornfield. His intention was to kill the boyfriend and then rape the woman. Things went wrong, forcing him to kill both. He was also loaned a gun, and Chester served time for teen pornography and rape before the incident. To add on to this, Chester had a cut on his arm. This might have happened when he was severing the bodies. When odds were against Chester, he admitted to his crime. Dale traded spots with Chester in 1994, being released. Dale is a strong churchgoer and is a wonderful man. If the death penalty would have went through, this innocent man, Dale, would have died.
For this reason, many people believe that there is a problem with our legal system. People can be killed although they were falsely convicted.
On the other side of this argument, people feel like the only punishment for murderers and serial killers is the death penalty. Some people, especially victims' families, want only the death penalty as justice.
Another issue taking the world by storm is euthanasia, or the right to kill someone who is suffering from an incurable disease or an irreversible coma. Should doctors be allowed to do this, and does the patient have to give consent for this to happen?
We will further evaluate both sides of this topic throughout Acts 1 through 4 of this podcast.
Euthanasia has been an ongoing issue throughout society. Euthanasia is the act of killing a patient suffering from a painful disease. It is more commonly known as mercy killing. Euthanasia is illegal in most states, with the exception of Washington, Oregon, Montana, and Vermont. To my surprise, 7 in 10 Americans believe in euthanasia, although it is going against federal law. Recent surveys given to teachers reveal the same idea. I had the privilege to interview Kelly Huff, a local nurse, about euthanasia. This is Bryce Huff, and I'm here with Kelly Huff interviewing her about euthanasia. How does your profession relate to euthanasia?
Well, I am a registered nurse at Mount Carmel Hospital. I have been there for approximately 2 years, and I work on a cardiac or a heart floor. But we do have patients who are dealing with end-of-life issues at times.
Do you agree or disagree with euthanasia being illegal in our hospitals?
Well, I can definitely argue both sides because I have seen the suffering that people encounter at the end of their lives. But ultimately, I do believe that euthanasia should remain illegal. There are some issues that you need to consider when you're talking about that topic, and one of them is religion. Basically, euthanasia is taking God's right to decide when we die. We're taking that into our own hands. And there's a story in the Bible that Christians believe. Job's wife, actually, she wanted him to curse God and to take his own life because he was going through all this suffering. And Job, who was a pretty strong man of God, said, shall we take the good and only the good from God and not accept adversity or the bad things from him? And he actually chose to accept God's plan for his life. He didn't end his own life. He chose to
go through it.
Absolutely. He chose to believe that God was sovereign and God had that right to plan for his life. So he believed that and he followed it. Another thing that you need to consider, I think, when you're talking about euthanasia is the legal component. There are patients, if Ohio said, okay, yes, euthanasia is legal, there are patients that may say, yes, I want to do this, I believe in it, but their families may disagree with that. They may say, they're not of sound mind, and they may file lawsuits, and there are already a lot of lawsuits in healthcare. So there's definitely a legal component that you need to consider when you're looking at euthanasia.
Right. What experiences have you encountered where euthanasia could have been useful?
Well, I've had several, but I remember a patient that I had a couple months ago. He was 97 years old and he was ready to die. He was so ready to die. He often would take my hand and just beg me. He said, "Please listen to me. I am ready to die. God is calling me. Can't you please help me?" And it was heartbreaking to have that experience and to not be able to help him any more than what I could do. He couldn't do anything for himself. His body was failing him. And it's those situations that do tug at your heart and just make you thankful for every day that you have on the earth.
Right. Has a patient asked to be put out of their misery before in the hospital?
Yes, they actually have. I had a patient, she was fairly young, in her 60s, early 60s, and she had liver failure, she had heart failure, and kidney failure. She was in a great deal of pain. She would moan and wince a lot. You could just tell from her facial expression that she was just in constant pain no matter what I gave her to help with that. And she repeatedly would say that she just couldn't take it anymore. She couldn't do it. And she knew that she wasn't going to get better from this. But unfortunately, the family was very, they were not understanding of that at all. They were even trying to get her transferred from our hospital to Ohio State University Hospital to be considered for transplants. And they were just certain that she needed to get a second opinion, when the truth was really that she wasn't going to even make it during the transport. She was in end of life stages. Even our doctors, told her that, and she was aware of that.
She's ready to go.
Yeah, she was ready to go, but the family didn't understand that, and they were almost a hindrance in that situation.
That's almost a large problem because you have to get the patient and the family on the same page.
Absolutely.
For anything to go through, and that creates lawsuits if you believe they were crazy or they didn't know what they were thinking.
Absolutely. And another thing that you need to remember too, although euthanasia is illegal in Ohio, palliative care is not illegal, and that is something that we do, in the hospital at end of life care and also in people's homes. And that's where we administer pain medications and sedatives so that hopefully whatever days that they have left are
less painful.
Yes, they are of good quality, and at least if they are, towards the very end, hopefully they're sedated enough that they aren't suffering. And that's really the best that we can do right now.
All right, thank you very much for your views on euthanasia.
Thank you.
Throughout the interview, we bring up important issues surrounding euthanasia. One of these issues include lawsuits. If doctors were allowed to euthanize patients, major paperwork would be needed. Family of the patient may disagree with what the patient wants. In addition, families may be divided in deciding whether the doctors can euthanize or not. A lawsuit may occur, delaying the doctor and prolonging the suffering of this patient. As described in the interview, a patient may not want to suffer while the family still wants them around. This can create huge lawsuits dealing with murder. The hospital may then lose thousands of dollars and even their reputation or license. Kelly also shows how euthanasia may oppose God. Do we as humans have the right to decide whether someone should die? Should we live through the best moments in life and skip the horrid? According to the Bible, which Christians follow, God has a plan for each of our lives. By ending someone's life, we are going against and obstructing God's plan. On the other side of this argument, why should we make someone live who we know is in pain and will soon die? With all of this said, euthanasia is still a major issue. Patients suffer daily in our hospitals, wondering when their time will come. Yet, our court system punishes those who take someone's lives, and society is generally in favor of that. We sentence them to death and believe it's okay. This is also against God's plan, yet we seem to justify it because they did something bad. Euthanasia will put someone out of their misery, and we generally think they are good and we're helping them.
When we began research for our podcast, we used the words assisted suicide and euthanasia interchangeably. We soon discovered that they are two separate things. Euthanasia is described as the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease or in an irreversible coma. Assisted suicide is defined as the suicide of a patient suffering from an incurable disease affected by the taking of lethal drugs provided by a doctor for this purpose. The difference is euthanasia is the doctor killing the patient, and assisted suicide is where the doctor gives the patient the supplies to do it. For example, the doctor supplies the patient with the lethal dose of drugs, and the patient then takes them. The difference between these is huge, as it is legal in some states to physically assist in suicide, but it is illegal in the United States to be euthanized. A perfect example of the difference is the story of former doctor Jack Kevorkian. In 1970, his pathology career had taken over his life, causing him to break up with his then fiancée. Later, in 1986, he tried to expand his death row idea, which was a clinic that would euthanize patients that wanted it to happen. The idea was denied. After the denial of the idea, he wrote papers about the benefits of euthanasia. After this, he designed the Thanatron, a suicide machine. It was made out of $45 of materials. The machine would mix 3 fluids, a painkiller, a saline solution, and a fatal dose of potassium chloride. In 1990, the entire world would know his name. He assisted in the suicide of Janet Adkins, an Alzheimer's patient. As news broke to media outlets, the state of Michigan charged him with murder. The case was dismissed due to Michigan's mixed views on assisted suicide. In 1991, Michigan suspended Kevorkian's medical license, but that didn't stop him from assisting in people's suicides. He created the Mercitron, which killed the patient by carbon monoxide poisoning. The state of Michigan did not approve of his actions as they passed many laws that banned assisted suicide. They prosecuted Kevorkian 4 times, but he received little jail time thanks to his lawyer. Finally, in 1999, a jury convicted Jack Kevorkian of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole. In 2007, he was released on good behavior. In 2011, he died due to heart and kidney problems. The difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide really matters when talking about Jack Kevorkian's story. He did not technically kill his patients, but he did aid in the suicide. The difference is huge, as it is the difference between life in prison or release on parole. Currently, euthanasia is illegal in the U.S., but the states of Oregon, Montana, Washington, and Vermont allow assisted suicide. I believe that Kevorkian's story started the debate of whether assisted suicide should be legal or not. It shouldn't take a person being assisted and being killed by a doctor for us to finally start to see the difference between assisted suicide and euthanasia. It should be known already. A person's life is in the hands when you talk about this, so it is very important. Nationally, we should receive awareness about the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide. Whether to allow it is a big issue, and it is a big difference to know. Because people are voting on allowing assisted suicide or not, people really need to know the difference, as it could sway them one way or the other. They could be thinking, I don't want a doctor to have the right to kill someone, when they really aren't. Therefore, the difference between euthanasia and assisted suicide needs to be further examined and known more by everyone.
I believe making assisted suicide legal was a bad federal decision. We are leaving the decision of life or death in the patient's hand. They could be mentally unstable or unaware of the situation. The patient's family could also disagree with their decision. There has been many cases where the patient was unable to make a decision. They could also make a rash decision without thinking of the outcome. Euthanasia and assisted suicide leaves millions of lives on the line. Do we have the right to make decisions on someone's fate? We simply can't predict the future.
The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, has been a common punishment throughout history for criminals convicted of serious crimes. The punishment of death was first introduced in Hammurabi's code. It was believed that the only fair punishment for vicious criminals was to put them to death. The death penalty has evolved over time. Early forms of execution used animals to perform the deed. Different ways the executions were performed were crushing by elephant, devouring by animals, stings from scorpions and bites from snakes, tearing apart by horses, and trampling by horses. Then guns came into play, and methods such as a firing squad or a blowing from a gun were introduced. Hanging was also a popular method of execution, especially during the American Revolution. Then electrocution was introduced into the world of execution. This became popular in many of the early United States. It was eventually abolished in 2009 and was replaced by lethal injection. Next, we will be interviewing a lawyer about different statistics of the death penalty. What are the requirements for the death penalty?
The requirements for the death penalty, well, you have to be found guilty by a jury of aggravated murder, which is essentially like there's a special kind of murder. It's not just your let me contrast this with like if you've heard of like a heat of passion crime. This you can't have just like some sort of heat of passion. Like there's a murder plus, like you have somebody who's thought about it, premeditation, and then there also has to be an additional factor. Like there's 7 different factors that are in our statute that give you the option of if one of those factors applies, then the person is going to be facing the death penalty. And they are things like if you killed somebody under the age of 13, if your victim's under the age of 13, or if there's more than one person, or if the person is the president or a governor. Let's see, what else is there? If you commit a crime in the course of, if you commit a murder while you're in the course of committing another felony, if you're robbing somebody or raping or committing arson, things along that line. But so basically, it's murder plus, and then you go to a jury, and then the jury decides first if you're guilty, and then there's a second kind of trial, basically, and that's where they decide if, even though you're guilty, are you the worst of the worst, and should you be sentenced to death?
Okay. Have you ever had a client on death row?
Oh yeah, all of my clients are on death row. So I've represented, probably roughly 20-ish people. I've helped save the lives of 6 or 7, and I've witnessed the deaths of 3.
Okay. How are people executed in Ohio?
They are executed by lethal injection, which basically is just what it sounds like. They get an IV, and then a drug is administered to stop their heart. There's a whole bunch of controversy over what kind of drug can be used in the injection. So right now, nobody's been executed in a while because they don't have a drug that's basically been constitutional, that they can know is constitutional. So it might be at least until next year it's definitely going to be at least until 2016 before there's another execution.
Okay, so do all the other states use lethal injection? Or
No.
how does it differ?
No, not all of the states have the death penalty. It's roughly split. I mean, there's more that have it than don't. And some of the other states, because everybody's having the same issue with the drug problem, where they can't find, they know what drug is constitutional to use that won't produce pain when they try to execute somebody, but the pharmaceutical companies they won't sell them to prisons because they don't want their drugs used to put people to death. So there's a lot of states that are having difficulty getting access to the drugs. And so some states are using firing squads now. Some states still have the electric chair as an option. And at least one state is now using gas.
Oh, interesting. So, does the death penalty, would it cost more or less than keeping a criminal in prison for life?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Does the death penalty cost more or less than a life sentence?
It costs more. It costs incredibly a lot more. There's studies that show that to put somebody to death ultimately ends up being millions for just one person, whereas for one person to keep them in prison for the rest of their lives, you don't even go anywhere near the million mark. It's around $100,000 or so.
Do you know why it costs so much to put someone to death?
There's a couple reasons. Probably the biggest reason is that there are a lot of when you're going to kill somebody, they want to make sure that everything is that they're doing everything possible to make sure they're killing the right person. So there are a whole lot of procedures in place to make sure that there are some checks and balances to make sure that they check the conviction and they check the sentence over and over. So there's a whole lot of appeals. And in order to have a whole lot of appeals, you have a whole lot of attorneys. And in order to have a whole lot of attorneys, you have to have a whole lot of courts. So there's a lot of time and effort and energy that goes into it in appeals, but then also in the beginning, a death penalty case is always longer. It just in court. Like normally when you have a murder trial, it'll last less than a week. With a death penalty case, you're going to be there for 4 weeks. And so then you've got a trial court that has completely shut down as far as all their other cases go because they're wrapped up in a death penalty case for a significant period of time. And that prosecutor is stuck with that case for that period of time. And then there are a lot of experts that get called in when it comes to a death penalty case. So then, and most times, in fact, I can't remember if there's ever been somebody on death row who was able to afford their own attorney and experts. So, because they're all disproportionately poor, then the court ends up having to pay for all those experts. So, because it's disproportionately poor, and you get all these additional experts, and you need all these additional experts because the cases get bigger and more confusing and more complex and more, serious, then there's more money that the court has to pay, which comes out of taxpayers' dollars.
Okay.
That's all the questions we have for you. Thank you for answering them. We really appreciate it.
No problem.
As discussed in the interview, it costs much more to execute someone than it does to keep them in prison for life. The cost of the death sentence is a negative, but there are some positives to the death sentence. One positive of it is that the punishment of death makes people reluctant to commit a serious crime. The fear of dying will make people reluctant to commit a crime where the death penalty is in play. Another pro of the death penalty is that defending lawyers pay much more attention to detail and try their hardest not to make mistakes. This is good for criminals being convicted because they have hard-working and talented lawyers trying their best to get them off death row. Besides the cost, another con of the death penalty is that it is immoral. A government has no right to take the life of a citizen. The issue of morals is a big reason people are trying to abolish the death penalty completely. Abolitionists believe that the death penalty interferes with a person's natural rights. They have a valid point, but the death penalty has been beneficial to mankind so far. It has rid the earth of traitorous and rotten people. On the other side, it has also sent many innocent civilians to their death. The death penalty is a very controversial topic. A lot of people might have an opinion about the death penalty, but they might not be well informed of all aspects of the topic. Before they support a side of an argument, they should thoroughly research both sides of the topic. Then after they do their research, they can properly make an opinion of the death penalty. In researching these topics, we've discovered new facts that affect our opinions. We came into this knowing little about the death penalty or euthanasia, although after learning about the goods and bads and hearing some stories, we can give a proper opinion of each topic. My opinion of the death penalty is that it should be used for serious crimes. If someone has committed a serious crime, we should not waste our resources to keep them in prison for life. I know that it is immoral to execute someone, but it is necessary in certain situations. I also realize that there is a need to be sure of someone's guilt before they are put to death.
I believe euthanasia should not be allowed in our hospitals. There are too many things that complicate the process. For example, the families could be divided about whether to allow a family member's death. Also, as Bryce discussed with Kelly Huff, it would require a lot of paperwork to finish. Also, a sickly family member may not be thinking rashly when they say they want to be euthanized. Lastly, I don't feel we have the right to kill someone no matter what.
After researching euthanasia, I have realized it is an extremely complex issue. Not only does it deal with death, but also it has lawsuits, family issues, and murder. Even though euthanasia is illegal, 7 in 10 Americans disagree. This truly shows Americans don't want to suffer in the end-of-life stages. On top of suffering, we are also wasting money to keep someone alive, but practically brain dead. There are also major issues against euthanasia. We are simply giving up on someone when we euthanize a patient. Are we allowed to take someone's life? Euthanasia can be both harmful and helpful in our society.
We took a survey of Jackson Middle School teachers, asking them their opinions on these topics. Out of 12 teachers interviewed, 7 supported euthanasia, 3 were against it, and 2 had mixed feelings. This was surprising because euthanasia is illegal, but it is supported by 58% of people surveyed. The results for the death penalty showed that 8 supported it, 2 were against it, and 2 had mixed feelings. This was less surprising because the death penalty is legal in Ohio. After completing this podcast, we have found that there are arguments for both sides of each topic.